All right. So remember 49 that the DMV claimed that 60% of teens passed their driving test on their first attempt. And we concluded that, in fact, that percentage is different, right? And we did it with the alpha equals 0.05 significance level. So problem 51 goes back to exercise 49. And instead of doing an hypothesis test, they want us to construct a 95% confidence interval. And notice that 95% confidence interval ties with that alpha equals 0.05 significance level. Okay, so let's go ahead and this time construct and interpret a 95% confidence interval for the proportion of all teens in the state who pass their driving test on the first attempt. And we'll answer part B, explain what the interval in part A tells you about the DMV's claim. So part A, we want to estimate the actual proportion P of all teens who pass the driving test in the first try at a 95% confidence level. So the plan is we should use a one sample Z interval for P if the conditions are satisfied. So let's go ahead and check for random. Of course, we know that it is random because the teens were randomly selected. So the teens were randomly selected. All right. Normal was, remember, n times p hat, where n was 125. And remember, p hat was, so p hat was equal to that 86, right? 86 over 125, right? So that 86 over 125, which was that 0.688. So we can do this times 0.688, which is 86, which is bigger than or equal to 10, right? And then we can do n times 1 minus p hat, which is equal to 125, times 0.312, and that is equal to 39, and that is bigger than or equal to 10, so that checks. So we know that our normal condition is satisfied. Now let's do our independent condition. So independent, and that also known as our 10% condition. Okay, so n is equal to 125, and big N is the number of teens in the state, right? All right, so 125 is less than or equal to a tenth of n. Well, I guess I should put just the inequality normally. So n is less than or equal to a tenth of big N, and that's 125 is less than or equal to a tenth of all teens in the state, or 1,250 is less than or equal to n, and of course, that is satisfied. So we have all conditions are met. So now let's do a 95% confidence interval. So remember to get the, so this was p hat plus or minus z star times the square root of p hat times 1 minus p hat all over n. And now let's find our critical value, right? So this is a 95% confidence interval. So remember, here's our little picture. So we want this area here and this area here, where this is 0.025 and this is 0.025, because it's going to be 1 minus 0.95 over 2, which is that 0.025. So notice this is like our rejection regions for our null hypothesis, right? Like if they fall in here. So this is negative z, which equals, so let's go ahead and go to our table. So 0.025 is negative 1.96. So negative 1.96, and this would be positive 1.96. So remember, this acts as like our rejection regions for our null hypothesis, and we're going to check out our 95% confidence interval that's in here. So this is equal to plus or minus, so 1.96 times the square root of 0.688 times 0.312 all over 125, which is equal to 0.688 plus or minus 0.081, which gives us the interval 0.607 to 0.769. So our interval, our actual proportion should be between 0.607 and 0.769, and that coincides with our test, our hypothesis test we did in 49, right? Because we established that the proportion should have been different than 60%, and we can see that the actual proportion should be between 60.7% and 76.9%, right? So I hope you can see how this ties in with our hypothesis testing. So we are 95% confident that the interval from 60.7% to 76.9% captures the true proportion of teens who pass the driving test on the first try. And then I just briefly remember part B was asking, explain what the interval in part A tells you about the DMV's claim. So recall in 9.49 that the DMV's claim is that 60% of teens pass the driving test on their first attempt. But 0.60 is not in the interval, so it's not in that interval we calculated in A, right? So it is not a plausible answer. From the interval, this interval, it appears that 95%, with 95% confidence, more than 60% of teens pass the driving test on their first attempt, which does coincide with our results that we got in 49.